Okay, guys, so we are going to move on to question number 4 for the political cartoons and not cartoons, political machines and progressive movement. Question 4, based on source 4, which statement best explains how progressive reformers influence the political process? This is one that I'm going to do again, that sometimes it's easiest to eliminate choices versus trying to find the right one. So A, reform efforts expanded suffrage to racial minorities. B, reform efforts increased public participation in politics. C, reform efforts restricted the power of the federal government. And D, reform efforts created a political system with two parties. So let's look at our source. First thing, we need to go back to source 4. Here is source 4. It's listed right here at the top. The title is Political Reforms During the Progressive Era. So I put these side by side so that you could see and really compare them. So here we go. Which statement best explains how progressive reformers influence the political process? So A says that reform efforts expanded suffrage to racial minorities. So let's look at the timeline and see, if you just kind of skim over, do we see anything about racial minorities? We see a lot of mention of states and voting rights, but we don't see anything specifically saying racial minorities. So that's probably not your answer. So we're going to cross that out. B, reform efforts increased public participation in politics. Well, there's a lot in this timeline talking about politics. It's talking about voting, ballots, civil service, municipalities. So that could be it. So let's just keep looking. C, reform efforts restricted the power of the federal government. So we have all these things happening, and then at the very bottom it's talking about Congress ratifying the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. It doesn't look like that could be an answer, because why would Congress ratify the 17th Amendment if that was so? And then lastly we have D, so I'm going to cross that one out as well. Lastly we have, and when you're taking your test, you have this tool where you can put a little X over ones that are wrong to just help you keep your mental pace of where you're at. So you can just put that X over your wrong answers. And then D, reform efforts created a political system with two parties. Again, looking at the timeline, it doesn't say anything about parties. It talks about states. It talks about elections, and obviously we know political parties have a lot to do with both states and the elections. We have states that are typically red or blue and all of that, but it really doesn't mention specifically anything about two parties in that timeline. So your most likely answer is going to be B, reform efforts increase public participation in politics. So suffrage, the 17th Amendment, what do these things mean? Suffrage is the right to vote. That's something that you should know. Anytime you think of, or you see the word suffrage, automatically associate it with voting rights. Next, the 17th Amendment. What is that? It just basically, in a nutshell, it gave people the right to vote for their senators so that they can have direct election rights. People can choose who is in office representing them.